Afternoon, everybody. Standard disclaimer, thoughts are my own. They don't represent any other organization or group or anything else. So I guess we hold me accountable. I'd like you to take a moment and imagine you've been invited to a formal black tie dinner with the President of the United States. You'd probably think about, I may need to go rent or get a tux or a nice formal ball gown. And my question that I'd like you to imagine is, do you want that pressed and dry cleaned and well-prepped tuxedo or ball gown? Would you like that to be absolutely covered in rainbow glitter or not? Show of hands, who's going with the glitter? We got one glitter, two. Not seeing a lot of other people. It's not a trick question. The rainbow glitter question is what I'm going to try and connect to you for the remainder of this presentation. I'm going to talk about connecting CTI to decision makers and specifically trying to look at the question of why they won't listen. And I do it through the lens of a law enforcement, a counterintelligence, and human background, and working into my more recent cybersecurity experience. But I'm going to talk specifically about being a bodyguard and being a bodyguard for someone like this. This is an AI-generated photo of an Air Force 4-star general walking into a venue in Washington, D.C. And of course, there's a bunch of glitter in the air. So I had to do an AI-generated version of this because the event didn't actually happen this way. In 2012, so about 11, 12 years ago, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the highest ranking member of the Air Force, and their security detail, for whom I was the lead on, we had to take the chief to go have dinner with the president. And we see a nice blue Air Force service dress uniform. But the problem was the hotel in DC where this event was going to happen was going to get protested by the Occupy DC group. Anybody remember when they were camped out in several of the parks around the city about 10 years ago? That'd be kind of a mess. But Occupy DC thought that this was an elitist type of event, and they felt like protesting let people know, hey, we don't like this. Part of their protest was going to try and disrupt and embarrass attendees at the event by, we didn't know, was it they're going to throw eggs, or were they going to throw glitter, or were they going to drop envelopes of powder? We just didn't know. But we'd received specific threat intelligence saying we need to watch out. So with that threat intelligence, we actually went downtown and actually walked around and talked to people in Occupy DC, and we determined that threat intelligence was very credible. And so I had to go in and interrupt the general's day and say, sir, tonight we're taking you to dinner at the Alfalfa Club with the president, and we've got to change how we do things because we have this issue, this threat intelligence we've determined to be credible. We're going to move fast, we're going to drop secure, I'm going to be right there to block any eggs or whatever, we're going to get in and we're going to go. The boss looked at me and says, that sounds good. It's a good plan. Let's do it. That night when we pick him up, get him ready to go, I reiterate the plan. Sir, remember, we don't want to give him any chances to get anything on you. He said, got it. Good. So when we arrived at the event, we get the general in the secured spot, hand him off to the Secret Service, and no glitter on the general's uniform. This is a screenshot from a YouTube video that Occupy DC put out, and unfortunately, that's Senator Lieberman getting glitter bombed on his way into the event. So there were two different reactions to the threat intelligence that was out there. And I'm pretty sure that the Capitol Hill police also had the same threat intelligence we did, but they just didn't go down and I think check it out firsthand. They didn't make contact with those people that are trying to do something. They didn't make contact with the adversary. So I'm going to talk today about, from that perspective, how do we connect our CTI? How do we help our decision makers understand how to make a proactive decision? And I'm going to talk about a cycle of credibility. And it's really a way that you as an analyst or even as a manager or a director in your conversations and in your reporting can connect your CTI to decision makers and really hopefully not have to answer that question, why won't they listen? I'm going to talk about maintaining contact with the adversary. And some of these photos that I've got here, the one on top, the guy in the blue shirt, that's me. The gentleman shaking hands that's on the left-hand side, that's the general. So I'm right there. There's a whole lot of security around, so I felt okay in that situation. That picture below is when I was with a combat camera squadron in the Air Force, and we're on patrol through the middle of Kirkuk, Iraq in 2003. That was a much sketchier situation. And so the idea is a coworker of mine used to say, well, Brett, you just want to get out and smell the breath of the enemy. And he was making fun of me. He's like, you just want to be as close to the action and make your mom as nervous as possible. So my background is in the intelligence community, information operations, federal law enforcement, counterintelligence, and then in about the last 4 or 5 years, I've done IT security officer work, some digital forensics work, and I've even had to testify in federal court on some of my forensics findings. So it's kind of a mishmash of different experiences, but it's all kind of held together by living in the intelligence cycle. So let's talk about how I'm just going to define it, because I actually really like how CrowdStrike is defining it. I know that's a little bit tough to read, but CrowdStrike says threat intelligence is data that's collected, processed, and analyzed to understand a threat actor's motives, targets, and attack behaviors. Okay, but what I really like is the next sentence. Threat intelligence enables us to make faster, more informed, data-backed security decisions and change their behavior from reactive to proactive in the fight against threat actors. So this is about having our CTI as a community be more effective in driving a proactive decision. The goal is really just good security decision making, and the idea is we're going to get left of bang, okay? Bang would be the incident, whatever it is, the glitter being thrown, or an incident popping up on our SIM, or a ransomware event, and all of a sudden we're in an incident response mode. We want to operate in the world before that happens. We want to be proactive. And here's the big thing. If you're having trouble selling CTI as a capability that your organization needs, left of bang is always cheaper. There is always return on investment to find somewhere. There's always savings left of bang. We go right of bang after an incident happens, after the glitter's popped out. Senator Lieberman was covered in glitter the whole night. Every time we saw him, I'm like, oh, the poor guy. We discovered that if you dump water on someone that had glitter thrown on them, you cannot brush that stuff off. So if I'm going to talk about people getting glitter bombed, and I've got a few examples of recent cyber incidents, and I say glitter, I just mean a breach that probably cost money. So what? Has anybody ever gotten that response? Go and tell your manager anything. It doesn't matter, but it could be a good report that you came up with. I've got good tactical CTI. We've got IOCs we've got to work at. We'll get to it. So we're fighting that malaise or that reaction. But if our reporting and our communications, they don't have any connection to the business priorities, it's very tough to be anything other than, okay, I read that. That was just another one of my 1,000 emails that popped in today. So the question to ask while we're writing and researching and doing everything is, are we connected with business priorities? How do you find those out? Make an appointment. I've got a vice president, chief information officer, and if I had a question, I'd talk to my boss, the director, and I'd say, I think we should sit down, have a half-an-hour conversation about this. Okay, get on my calendar. That's a way to start the cycle of credibility. And then you can answer, where is that ROI? What makes whatever you're trying to get me to do a good decision? It's inherently a human discipline. So Katie Nichols, our mentor here today and SANS instructor and director of intelligence for Red Canary, she says it very succinctly: threat intelligence is fundamentally a human discipline. It requires humans to make sense of the complex and disparate information out there. There's a human that has to make a decision, and they are being pulled in any number of different directions. And we have a tendency to focus right in on, there's a threat, we need to stop the threat. Sir, something bad's going to happen. We've got a plan, but we're going to try and stop that threat. And unfortunately, we've got short attention spans, right? So like Ross mentioned in the first talk this morning, sometimes you only have 2 sentences to make a point. Or if I'm trying to tell a general, sir, I'm trying to protect you, and I've only got 30 seconds to say that something might happen, I've got to really choose my words carefully. because we have to take into consideration that there's a human there that has to make that decision. So cycle of credibility. This is something that I'm kind of putting out there as a way to build credibility for you and your organization, and to be able to have tough conversations where you can speak truth to power. And first and foremost, you've got to have a concise, clear, fact-based assessment. There's got to be data that supports it, and it's got to be unemotional. And a lot of us, you can see it all over the place in the Slack channel right now. There are all kinds of examples already of these reports. So that's not our issue. Our issue isn't doing a good report. Our issue is, what are we doing after that? Or how are we handling it after that? And so you have to have a priority relevant plan. Picking out some IOCs or that last paragraph, hey, this is what you should do from here on out in order to try and mitigate this vulnerability. That's probably not enough. And if you really want someone to listen, you've got to take a little bit of time to understand where it is they're coming from. As soon as they see something slightly tailored in their direction, just trust me, just use the word ROI. That's the word that VPs live in, right? But you also have to agree on accountability. So when I tell the general, sir, we've got a problem, Occupy DC is going to try and disrupt this event, but we've got a plan. I have to get his buy-in on that plan. He might just say, no, I'm not doing it that way. I'm going to take my sweet time and actually go shake hands with some people. And then we've got to enter into a conversation. Sir, I think if you do that, you're going to end up shaking hands with the president, and glitter's going to shake off, or an egg's going to run off your shoulder, or whatever else. We got to agree on that accountability. And I've got a great example with the SolarWinds breach about how a chief information officer allegedly did not have anyone saying, you might be literally held accountable for this in civil court. And then it's all really brought together by having continuous feedback. If the email goes out and you don't hear anything, can you set up a meeting to discuss 15, 20 minutes maybe? Or can you ask a follow-up question? And then all four of these steps are all informed by that point at the bottom. There has to be contact with the adversary. You can get out there and do work to make contact with the adversary. It could even just be log and event analysis. It could be anything that you're getting from your public-facing infrastructure. It could be like MITRE's program called Engage, where they actually have a program to help you set up entanglements in your environment to collect more data, to do passive and active intel collection. What calls are your APIs making? Who are they talking to? Anything that's communicating out, you can get fingerprints and information coming back in to help you tailor your products. So you can't forget that if you're going through a process, if you didn't get out and go walk around the park in DC and actually talk to Occupy DC, that's what gave me a lot of credibility to say, sir, this one's different. This isn't just a random guy. These are people that are really trying to get glitter on you. So we're going to do a little bit of credibility analysis here, and I'm going to use SolarWinds and then the MGM Caesars casino breaches of the past year as two examples. And what I want to get into is SolarWinds right now is in, they've had a civil action filed against them by the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm going to go into that a little bit. So anything that I'm talking about with SolarWinds or MGM Caesars, I'm basically saying allegedly or reportedly, as described in either the civil complaint or for the MGM Caesars, what we're finding out in the news. Go to darkreading.com, go to Bleeping Computer, you're going to find those stories. And that's actually a good place if you kind of want to get a rundown of the day. Go there. But SolarWinds specifically hits me right where I live in my job as an information security analyst. So looking at this timeline here, this is just a timeline of the breach. So SolarWinds product Orion, which was a network monitoring software, it eventually got infiltrated by a threat actor, and that was APT-29, the Russian intelligence service, the SVR. And they were breached as early as September of 2019. And the question is, when did they know? How much did they know? And then what did they do to try and prevent it? And unfortunately, when we read through the civil complaint, they knew that things were bad, but yet they had nothing in that cycle of credibility of coming up with a plan or understanding their accountability for how bad it was, and then having feedback. When you've got an engineer or your senior information security manager that's saying, this is bad, not good. That's not really a clear, unemotional assessment though, is it? So if we look farther down this timeline, we'll see that there was a US CERT alert issued in December of 2020. And all of this communication that I'm going to kind of talk about that SolarWinds had occurred before that CERT alert came out. That's the bang, really. That's things happening to the left of there on the 20th. I'll use my little right here. So everything here is kind of left of bang, but unfortunately, the bang was probably right here when they got accessed, or that they started injecting code into the SolarWinds products. So I'm gonna sit here because this is, to me, this is the important slide. Here's the civil action. You can find it on the sec.gov website, but it names SolarWinds Corporation and their Chief Information Officer, Timothy Brown, as the defendants. And there's a lot of allegations throughout this document. But the one that I do every day is I live and breathe by NIST 800-53. Those are the security controls. And it's everything that you do or you're suggested to do to secure your system. And being that my company is a government contractor, we don't have a lot of options. They say do, we go do. But SolarWinds had 60% or more of the total controls just unmet or partially met. So could they say, like I have over there on the right-hand side, could they say that they had a commitment to high security standards? Well, that's what they were telling their shareholders. That's what they were telling their investors. But unfortunately, the investigation starts to reveal that they had passwords disclosed. There were a number of ways that they ignored red flags about what was happening in their environment, all the way to, we're pretty sure that we've got a Russian APT threat and they are actively working against us. Well, that'd be a great time to call who? Anybody? You can throw it out there. Might be a little bit, who said that? That's a great time to call the FBI. I'm not saying that as an analyst, you light yourself on fire and say, we have to do this or else. But that communication has to start making its way up because there's an accountability issue there. You've got a foreign APT threat. You have a feeling, you have good indication that's there in your system, and you're ignoring the red flags. And so the Securities and Exchange Commission is just accusing them of defrauding investors and customers by saying our security is great when they knew that it wasn't. So March 2020, their MSPs for SolarWinds start getting attacked by the threat actor. June 2020, they had strong indications that they were being specifically targeted. And then their security engineer in November 2020 is sending in, they don't say whether it's Slack or Teams, but we can imagine. It says, our products are riddled, he meant, with vulnerabilities, and obviously have been for many years. And then this is just one blurb from the civil complaint. And this is where that information security employee is talking to their Infosec manager, saying products are riddled, obviously have been. But the part I'm highlighting here, they say, I have no idea what we can do about it. Even if we started to hire like crazy, which we will most likely not, it will still take years, can't really figure out how to unbleep this situation. Not good. So if we're talking about a cycle of credibility, we've got an assessment that's not very good, but we don't have a plan. They're admitting we don't have a plan. And so how can you communicate to a decision maker when you don't even have an idea of where you want them to go with this info? So back to this cycle of credibility, we don't really have a valid assessment, so we really can't work to a plan. We can't get to the accountability. And now we're here quite far to the right of bang with SolarWinds. And now we're talking about civil actions. And what they were really trying to do was what? Protect stock prices? I mean, that's natural. You want the company to generate revenue. So the MGM and the Caesars breach, is this ringing a bell for a few of you who here are familiar with this one? A little bit, great. So basically 2 distinct responses to a ransomware attack that really shut business down for them. So slot machines had their own version of a blue screen of death. Hotel patrons were not able to actually get into the room and get access through their key cards. I mean, imagine if we had it upstairs and you just get the red light when you're trying to get into your room. So Caesars reportedly paid out to their group that had created the ransomware breach, and reportedly got back online in about 10 days from an incident response perspective. And then an interesting point that somebody made was, well, what they likely paid in that ransom payment was probably or likely less than 0.1% of their total budget for that year. That might not even have been a blip on somebody's radar when you're actually doing a full budget review. So I'm not saying that, I mean, generally the FBI is going to say don't pay a ransom, but they made a business decision. They made a brutal business decision. MGM, it's a different group. They had Scattered Spider that they're going up against. They both got breached in the same way by their Okta identity and access management service. But MGM chose not to pay and said, no, we're going to do it the hard way, or I don't know what they thought. But I find it fascinating that you've got two organizations in the exact same business area, and they're going through a cycle, a decision-making cycle, and arriving at two different decisions. So quoting Rob Lee, SANS Institute's Chief Curriculum Director, he was talking specific about how Caesars and MGM responded to the cyber attack. And he talked about how you were trying to make the least worst decision. And then he said, it tends to be a complex decision process that always has a positive and a negative. There's always that back and forth. And he says, some would say it's a brutal set of outcomes. And it is when you're talking about money, or you're talking about the survivability of your company. So I'm going to hover on this slide for a little bit. So you've got a report. The report's gone out, and you've got no back. There was no way, or we don't have the money, or we can't support that, or we can't shut prod down for the time that it takes for us to either run the patch or do an update or whatever it is. Well, our job in the analyst world is to figure out what evidence could we go get that could help convince them. So now it's time to change our intelligence requirements and figure out where should we go? What info should we go get? What log analysis can we do? Can we see if we're actually getting hit by IPs that are associated with a Russian intelligence service? Do we need help? Do we need outside assistance? There's a whole range of options. And the idea is you can't take no for an answer. You've got to enter into that negotiation of how do I get to yes? They're not listening. Well, propose something. Propose a solution, get the no, and then figure out what mitigations and actions are still on the table. And that's the feedback part. Are you having a conversation? Or if it's not you, I would look at it as, I'm going to get this info to my boss. And I want my boss to carry that through, because he's going to speak from an information system security officer perspective. And it's about negotiating for a positive outcome. So the pathway to yes, try not to offer binary solutions. We have to do this, it has to be this tool, or nothing. We can't protect you. I didn't have that option being a bodyguard for an Air Force general. Sometimes they would say, no, we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to go there. And then we'll have to figure out how to make him or her the safest as possible with what we've got. You really want the easy yes. Sir, you don't want glitter on your uniform, do you? I sure do not. Okay, well, here's our plan, and this is where we're going to go. And if you just do what we say, then you won't end up with glitter all over your uniform. That was an easy yes. And I've had tough no's. No, we're taking too many people. You're going to have to reduce the size of your team down. Sir, I got a concern about that. Well, yeah, you're going to be all right. Don't worry, you'll figure it out. You ever get that answer, you'll figure it out? So I'm going to point out James Detert in the Harvard Business Review in 2018. He had an article called Cultivating Courage Every Day. And he hit on it. He said, if you have information, or you're giving information that's relatable to their business priorities, and you're making effective use of the data, and you're keeping your emotions managed, that is where you're able to find that moral courage to stand up and say, we have to do something, or we're going to have somewhere on a spectrum of negative effects, something very serious. In my case, on the law enforcement side, sometimes those bad things that could happen where up to and including someone might die. Normally, we don't have that problem on the cybersecurity side, but I'm in the healthcare field. And so we have to think about, is someone going to try and shut down the generator in a hospital? Because if you do that and then you shut the power down, what are all the people in intensive care going to do with their machines? So sometimes it can be a life and death. And an analyst or a person in this line of work, we've got to know when it's time to stand up and say, look, this isn't going to be acceptable. We've got to do something. So what? Well, let me show you what happened to the SolarWinds CIO. Again, I'm not telling you to go threaten your VPs with something. It's your funeral. That's not how it goes. We're showing that we're on the same team. My meme there on the right. The small brain option on the top is saying we have a commitment to high security standards. That's what SolarWinds was telling their shareholders. Not a good move. I have no idea what we can do about it. The next one down. Well, at least admitting that there's a problem is a start, but that's still not a way to get your decision makers to make a proactive decision. Sir, we have a plan. Sir, I don't want you to get covered in glitter. Well, that works pretty well. But I'm going to tell you a quick story about we're going to the bunker. We're in Afghanistan. We're getting ready to bed down for the night in our location. We find out that due to some good Air Force Office of Special Investigations agents, they rolled up a couple terrorists that day, and the Taliban's probably going to be unhappy about that. So we knew that they were going to send some rockets our way that night. And I simply said, sir, got a good OSI detachment here. They rolled up a few bad guys. We're probably going to hear the rocket alarms. And when that happens, I'm coming in and I'm taking you to the bunker. And he kind of gives me this, well, I'll kind of make up my own mind on whether or not I go to the bunker. And I said, sir, I'm not telling your wife that I didn't get you to the bunker on time. End of discussion. So it's understanding where my moral ground was. And even the 4-star was outranked on that one. So we have to talk about choosing our hill. You're an analyst, you've discovered something, you need to sound the alarm. But there's an increasing severity of risk out there. And what we really have to look at is, if it's a service outage for 10 minutes, well, your business has to decide how important that is and how much of an alarm you should sound. But if you're moving your way down this severity of risk list that I've got here, if you start getting to a ransomware event being deployed in your environment, loss of business or civil criminal liability, you've got a moral obligation to say something. And then that cycle of credibility is about saying, we need to agree on who is accountable for this. All the way up to, unfortunately, again, with that generator example, are people going to get hurt by this? And therefore, we have to have a good response. So we're trying to negotiate proactivity. It could be as simple as that 2 sentences that Ross talked about this morning. I got 2 sentences to get this idea across. Current CTI shows APTX is in an active campaign against our organization. And we've got this, and this indicators. We've got the data there to support that. And then the plan. We can be fully protected as an organization for about $500,000. Well, for some companies, they're going to be like, what else do you want? Did we win the lottery? So we may have to negotiate to a different mitigation. Okay, well, we can do something for $50,000, but we're going to have to agree as an organization that there's this remaining residual risk. And that's a negotiation, that's feedback. And then if they say, well, we really can't come up with that, but you go back, get some more intelligence or focus your cyber threat intelligence to give you a specific answer, that's that contact with the adversary that will really build your credibility up. So my takeaways really are that the cycle of credibility is built over time. It's not going to happen instantly. And a lot of people are saying, well, I write reports and I give tactical intelligence and that's about it. But it is never too early to start thinking about, well, how do I get more people to read this? How do I get people to ask me questions about it? And this is it. If you're able to focus your reporting also including those business priorities, and then even talk about accountability. A friend of mine one time made an appointment with a 1-star general and just said, I want to talk. And it was so out of the ordinary the general was so intrigued, they said, yeah, absolutely. What are we going to talk about? And it was just amazing to me because I don't think I'd ever seen anybody do that. But we're talking about feedback, adjustment, negotiation. The intel cycle is messy. And I can tell a number of stories. The very first place that I worked in the intelligence community was Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Right outside my building, right across the harbor, I could see the Arizona Memorial every single day when I got to work. There is no greater reminder of an intelligence failure than going to work and seeing the Arizona Memorial every single day. So hopefully this gives y'all at least a few ideas on finding a pathway for the courage to speak that truth, to make your reporting more effective or your communication, because really you don't want to have to ask the question, why won't they listen? Really what we want is as a community to get better at connecting our CTI to those decision makers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brett. And we have time for maybe just one or two questions. Okay. So one that came in via Slack, you talked a lot about giving feedback. So the question is, do you have recommendations or maybe expanding on what you talked about for building continuous feedback? How do you make that a continuous thing?
Sure. And that's a great question. So what I didn't say enough is meeting people where they are. Sometimes you'll find that you've like, my boss is like, you can text me, you can Teams me, but email is going to get lost in the everything. So you might even have to experiment a little bit. But I would honestly say, just ask. If you get to be, I've had a couple of moments where I'm sitting at a luncheon at work or whatever, and all of a sudden, boom, our vice president of operations is stopping by. And you have a quick little conversation, and having an elevator pitch that's ready to go. What are you working on? What's going on? What's going on over in the security team today? Oh, well, actually, we're doing this. This is interesting. We're researching generative AI and how it could be used against us. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. Well, sir, I could set up a meeting at some point if you wanted to hear more, and of course, I'll run it by the boss. Oh, sure. So taking the opportunity to just figure out, hey, how does this person like to be communicated with? Because email, I mean, I'm avalanche. I'm sure we all are, right? So that's how I think where I'd start.
Nice. Meet people where they are. I think it's a great note. We'll do one in-person question, and then we will wrap and let you all move on to our next talk. So we're right here in person.
Real quick on that, genuine, specific, timely feedback. Also, it's like a good framework for how to make it continuous. My question, I'm a social behavioral scientist in the cyberspace, and I'm curious, what opportunities would you recommend to practice these types of behaviors, these conversations, opening, these channels of communication? Because obviously in crisis mode, leadership takes over and there's not a lot of opportunity to play around and try things and get comfortable with it. So I'm curious what you've seen or think of, opportunities to build this habit.
That's a great question. The first thing that pops into mind, just kind of what comes out is when you find the people that are in your specific, your work center, the ones that are really listened to. If they say, we've got a problem, and I'll throw a quick war story out there, working in the counterintelligence field, we actually identified that they were going to use some Russian software on an Air Force, platform. And all my boss had to do was gen up an email, no time for context, we're going to have to shut this part down. And it got shut down that day. And then we were able to have meetings later on to discuss and, in the appropriate facilities. But learning from those people that have that credibility, watch, learn. And then when you have a moment, it's never, at least where I work, you can go up and talk to that vice president, and I know it's kind of like jumping the chain of command, but have that conversation.